What's up, guys? It's Kit Dale here, aka the Tripod or Third Leg, BJJ black belt, two-time world pro champion, follically challenged human being, and I'm here to talk to you guys about how to structure a jiu-jitsu lesson, how I structure a jiu-jitsu lesson, which is very different to what you see normally, and I'm going to explain to you why I believe it's better. First reason is the way the jiu-jitsu is structured right now is basically a copy of the industrial age model, where you basically have a teacher at the front telling you exactly what to do, and if you repeat it exactly the same way, then you're a good student. And if you can learn the syllabus that the teacher believes is really important, then you're going to be really good, which is a massive lie. For two reasons. One, there is no perfect technique. Every single technique has flaws, can be countered, and almost anything can work at the right time. So timing is actually much more important than the technique. The second thing is the way you learn it is not really that good. I'll tell you why. This is how a normal class would look. You go to class, the teacher will get you to do a 10 to 15 minute warm-up. That'll consist of front rolls, hip escapes, and you've got to imagine by the time you get to brown belt, it's been a few years and you've probably done 2,000 to 5,000 front rolls, and it's really unnecessary to do any more of those, and I'm telling you that from personal experience. You don't learn that much doing that kind of stuff. It's very unpractical. There's certain elements that can help you at the start, but it gets old really quickly. Then you'll learn 3 techniques usually, 3 to 4, and it'll be like one technique, how to pass a guard or something, and then you go out and practice it. Then you come back in, they teach you another maybe variation of it, or another different technique, and you go out and practice it again and drill it, and then you come back in, you learn another one. And then you're expected to be able to execute it during live training, which is really unrealistic. For one, because you just learned it, and 2, you learned it the wrong way through muscle memory. 3, everyone else knows what you just fucking learned, so there's good luck trying to get that to work. Unlucky. Which is not really good. And as a black belt in jiu-jitsu, you ask anyone that's been around jiu-jitsu for a long time, ask them how many techniques they've learnt, and they'll probably tell you about 2,000 to 3,000, and ask them how many they remember, and they'll tell you about 2 to 3%. And it's not their fault, it's just the way the brain works. It doesn't really retain that much information, and especially in the way it's taught like that, it's really bad. Through repetition and regurgitation is not a really good way to learn. And I'm going to show you how I structure my class and why I think it's much more beneficial. The way I do it is in 4 segments. Firstly, there will be a warm-up, before the segments start. The warm-up is very subjective to the individuals because every individual is built different. They're different age, they may have different injuries, and I expect everyone to warm up appropriately to their body condition. So I'll give them a little bit of flexibility in the way we warm up. 2, I do a lot more sort of gymnastic sort of warm-ups, so very similar to like Russian wrestling, where you do like a little bit more technical stuff that's a lot harder to do, like flips and stuff like that, and obviously you would have to work up to that. But I think it's really good to have really good body control and body awareness, so I think it can help a lot and give a lot of confidence in jiu-jitsu. But obviously, depending on who it is, if they've got bad knees, there's certain things they can't do, and that's fine. You don't have to do everything, but it's there to practice. The other thing I do is I try and get them to do warm-ups that require problem solving or thinking, because it's the number one most important thing in jiu-jitsu, your ability to problem solve, and I think that you should always try and have as much elements of problem solving in that. So maybe it's grip fighting and they have a certain thing they need to do, or they need to hold a grip and be very soft and malleable with it and make sure that they can follow the opponent's wrists. I do this a lot where I get one opponent to grab their opponent's around the wrist like this, like both hands, and the other opponent is just going to move their arm around, and your goal is just to hold on to it. Not hard, but just to be able to be very flexible in your position. So you've got to follow them into every angle they can go. To 1, teach you to be very light with your grips, which is important, and 2, be very malleable with them. Then we go into the class. Now this is the way I structure my class. The first section is called the explanation phase, where I explain. It could be a technique, it could be a position, or it could be a way of thinking, but I try and explain the why more than the how. I'm not trying to give my students a technique to drill and practice and just absorb that. What I want to give them is I want to give them information, an understanding of what I'm thinking, of variables, of principles, of body mechanics. I want to give them a really good understanding of a position. And once I feel like I've done that adequately, then we go into our next phase, which is called the experimentational phase. Experimental phase, where the students go out and they play around with that position. Now, I use the word, wisely, play around. I don't want them to copy what I did. I want them to experiment for themselves. I want them to get a good understanding of what I taught through trial and error. And sometimes what I do when I teach this is I teach half of the lesson that I want to teach, right? Because what I want to do is I want them to come up with a problem that I already have the answer for. Because we learn by association. We learn by association better than anything. So if I teach you something that you already have an understanding of, it's much easier for you to absorb the information than if you don't have an idea. So if something is really detailed, it's much better for me to give you half of it, then create an exercise that's going to get you to the point where you're going to come up with a problem where I already have that second half of the answer for. So I kind of create a supply and demand style training session so that I give you an exercise that brings up the problem that I'm going to have the solution for right up, rather than giving it to you earlier when you haven't even had that problem yet. It'd be very hard for you to associate with it. So sometimes I do that with that. So after the experimentational phase, sometimes I'll give them a little bit more of a lesson. Once they've done that adequately and I feel like, okay, they've got it, then we go into the implementational stage. So this is where I create specific training. Now what specific training is it's live training in a confined and specific area. So let's say we learned a half guard pass, okay, or how to play with half guard. Then what I do is I get them to play in half guard, and maybe they've got a pass and the opponent underneath has to take your back, and that's all you can do. So it's live training, but it's very confined, so it gives the students ample time to practice in that area. Otherwise, you can learn something in like half guard and then never even get to play it because you get stuck in someone's close guard the whole time, for example. So I create the specific training based on what they've learned and what I want them to experience. Once we've done that enough, I come back in. It'll be another Q&A. I allow the students time to ask any questions or any problems they had. And if they didn't have any, maybe I'll have some extra information for them or something that I saw. And then we go out and we just finish with free rolls or rounds of rolling, where I'm trying to get students to, partner up with someone that'll be beneficial for them. And it's always subjective on who the students are and what level they are. Okay, I like to think that coaching should be done with a lot of micromanaging, like looking at your students subjectively and individually and seeing where they're at and what they should be learning. Because if someone's 6'7" and another one's 5'1", it's going to be very different. Well, their application of techniques based on my concepts are going to be very different. So I want to give them different ideas. I'm sorry if you guys can hear the kids next door. There is something going on. I think they're doing an exorcism in there or something, but I apologize for that. But regardless, the concepts I give to people, and I give it to them in a sense where they've got the freedom to experiment and come up with their own application based on their own thought patterns and stuff like that and their own body shape. So then it allows them to have more of a signature style for them. So I'm going to be able to micromanage them differently. So I would speak to one individual about what I think they should work on and another one separately. And I definitely do it separately. I don't like the idea of, if I tell Johnny that he's going to work on arm bars and everyone else can hear that, then whenever they roll with him, all they're going to do is tuck their hands in their belts and go, hey, good luck, Johnny. It's not fair. So I try and tell them individually and privately what I want them to work on, because the timing is really important in jiu-jitsu. And the moment they know what you're doing, then the timing's gone. And that's why it's really hard when you go and teach a seminar to a group of new students and I teach them, a few different things and then expect them to be able to do it to each other straight away when everyone knows about it. So the timing element is lost. So I try not to do that, but obviously you have to have your own class to be able to do that. So that's basically the way that I structure a class. And I think it's really good because it brings up one of the more important things is that you start learning through trial and error more than through repetition. So when you learn through trial and error, you're storing information on two different parts of the brain. You've got your cerebellum, that is responsible for holding procedural memory and muscle memory. Anything that's in the body that you can't think of is muscle memory. like the way you run, the way you walk, all that kind of stuff. And then you've got the hippocampus that if I ask you what you did yesterday or to imagine something, then you're going to use information from your hippocampus to come up with that and to imagine things. And that's what you use primarily for problem solving. There's obviously a lot more details in this, so I'm going to oversimplify it, but I advise you guys to really study this kind of stuff because it's fascinating and it really helps you break down the better ways to learn things. So using a trial and error manner where people are, where I give them only principles and ideas and concepts to follow rather than strict techniques, it allows them the flexibility to use trial and error to come up with solutions, which means they're going to remember things a lot better because they're really taking all these steps themselves. They're trying things, they're experimenting, and something doesn't work and then something does work. And what it does is it really gets your emotions a lot more aroused because things are exciting and things are scary. And what happens is your hippocampus, that's your lizard brain, that's the thing that tells you whether you should fight or run in a life or death situation, has a big part in deciding where to store the information, how deep to store the information. And when you are emotionally aroused, it stores it on a much deeper level. So you're going to remember things much better by that. So there's a lot of science behind why I decided to teach like this. And this is basically the way I learned. It wasn't so structured. It was basically me doing it myself. I went from white to black in 4 years. Anyone can do it, okay? There's a lot of things that I've done the other way. I've learned how to play piano and guitar procedurally, which is the way I don't suggest to learn jiu-jitsu. And I can sound like I can play a lot of things, but I really suck. I have no idea about it. And all I can do is imitate other songs. And there's a lot of jiu-jitsu players that all they do is know jiu-jitsu moves. They're basically choreographed dancers. And even a lot of these are the best grapplers in the world. And you can ask them a lot of questions. And you see that very quickly it doesn't go much further than a practical application of things. There's no real thought or cerebral understanding, or there's no intellectual, psychological warfare, timing, all that kind of stuff. But the way you learn through trial and error, you're going to discover that really quickly because it's a huge part. The psychological part is massive in jiu-jitsu and it should never be overlooked. That's why I feel like I cater more for the intellects than what I do for the athletes that just want to smash and win tournaments. I prefer the guys that want to think and want to think about their body and longevity and be in this for the long game and really get a good understanding of this that applies to all areas of learning, not just jiu-jitsu. So anyway, thank you for listening. I hope that this answers some of your questions. Please send me your questions, comment on this, like, share it, tell your dad about it as well. I'm sure he's interested. And like always, go to kitdaletraining.com to check out my videos. Thank you for listening, and say hi to your mum for me.